But we have to be
being recorded.
Okay, welcome everybody. And we will start in about 2 minutes. Again, thank you for those who are joining us. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. We're seeing folks coming in and then we let you settle and we'll begin shortly. Okay, let's get started. We have a lot to talk about, and we have about an hour today with our esteemed panelists. So thank you so much for joining, for all the UChicago alumni, current students and friends, near and far. This is the third edition or the third series of the Future of Data Science and AI, which has been co-hosted by the UChicago Alumni Club of New York and the Pan Asian organization at the university. My name is Joy Shen. I am the co-chair of the Career and Connections Committee of the UChicago New York City Club, and it's my privilege to be here with you all. We have 4 panelists today, and we'll have them introduce themselves, and we'll dive into today's topic, which is about generative AI. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to our UChicago Alumni Office staff members, Ruby and Natalie, who are here. Thank you so much for your support. We couldn't be doing this without your help and your guidance. So with that, we'll introduce the panelists and we can get started. So starting with Jack, and then Darush and Baxter and Laura.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Super happy to be here and, sort of re-engaging with the UFC community. And thanks, Joyce, for inviting me to this panel. So I've been in the AI space for quite some time, and probably even before, AI was really an industry, kind of was just called data science or quant analytics. But yeah, so I'm currently at Meta. I run the analytics org there that's focused on the ads auction system that advertisers interact with. So it's things like the bidding behind advertising. So the advertising backend that kind of drives a lot of the revenue for Meta. And yeah, hi Chloe. Can you go?
It's a future maroon.
Yeah, it looks like it. And yeah, so I guess I would just say that my career has spanned both being an individual IC, doing data science for companies, but also on the managerial side. So yeah, I've been kind of around the block when it comes to those things. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Darush now.
Thanks, Jack, and thank you, Joyce, for inviting me to this webinar. Hi, everyone. I'm Dariush Lakap. I am a director of product management in NVIDIA's self-driving car department. On a daily basis, my job is to make sure that NVIDIA engineers and our partner engineers have the infrastructure they need to actually build the self-driving cars, which basically means that we manage a very large number of GPUs on a daily basis. I've been in the AI business on and off since 2010. I've worked on the Bing search engine. I've worked on Google Cloud AI, and also in JP Morgan building their AI platform. Also, I'm also an angel investor in very early stage startups that focus on data and AI. So somehow I like this space. So looking forward to chatting with you about it.
Baxter.
Great. Hey everyone, I'm Baxter. I currently lead one of the teams focused on privacy for Capital One. So I work with a lot of our AI ML engineers and data science teams to ensure that the models they're training are respecting user privacy. So there's a lot that is going into that space right now around, privacy, governance when it comes to data science. So and my UChicago connection on this topic was that I actually studied public policy and was one of the first people at UChicago to specialize in tech policy and wrote my thesis on AI regulation. So I've really been thinking about this since at least my college days and now in the professional world as well, what this intersection of tech, AI policy looks like. So looking forward to talking more. And yeah, thanks Joyce for the invite.
And last but not least, Laura.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you, Joyce, for the invitation. I'm Laura Chiticayu. I'm a distinguished engineer and the chief architect for IBM Natural Language Processing core foundational technologies in IBM. I've spent my entire professional career in IBM, the first 10 or so years in research, and the last 5 years in development in the product development organization. And I've been essentially working on NLP technology for 15 years. So I've been through the entire stack from rule-based to classic AI algorithms to deep learning algorithms to the latest foundational and generative AI algorithms. And I have experience not only in research and development, but lately in bringing the research into IBM products and helping customers utilize generative AI to its fullest potential. And my UChicago connection is through my esteemed colleague Rachel Reinitz, who couldn't make it here, but she's an alumni of University of Chicago, and knowing my passion for generative AI, she invited me.
That's awesome. Well, we have amazing practitioners here who can cover a lot of different ground. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. And I'm looking forward to learning a lot from you all. And I'm sure the audience as well. So what we're going to do today is sort of cover different key topics as it relates to generative AI. We're not going to talk about what is generative AI. We assume the audience have some background knowledge, and that hopefully all of you have tried out ChatGPT and maybe some other manifestation of the GPT model on the consumer side. But what we'll talk about today is on the industry side, the apply side, which covers, what are the key considerations in generative AI, touching on the foundational models, touching on how to translate generative AI technology and the models into building products. And then we'll talk about implementation, getting into some of the operational side of things, and then moving on to the future. We can talk about a lot of different things, the future of NLP. Laura, I'm sure you'll have some interesting comments there or perspective, and other areas. And we hope that we will take some questions at the very end from the audience as well, so that it's not just me asking the questions and facilitating this conversation. So maybe starting there for the panelists, and Dariush, starting with you and followed by Laura, is if you think about the generative AI space and the foundational model, like why is that important? Because that term wasn't even widely used like last year outside of a very technical community.
I think, at least from my perspective, it's a new category of AI altogether, generative AI. So it has the word generative in it, which means that new content, whether it is text or images or audio or anything else, will get generated by a machine. And that in and of itself opens up quite a few kind of new opportunities for products here and there. I give you one example. In the self-driving car kind of business, we need to train the autonomous vehicle to actually understand and know situations that we hope we never actually see in the real world. We hope we never actually have a real video of it. An example of that is being, a child running in front of the car. Hopefully, we never have a video of that one. But the car needs to know what that situation is and then be able to kind of react to it. Now the situation gets complicated if you have other vehicles around or other pedestrians around and things like that. So there are almost unlimited number of situations that we can generate there, and generative AI can easily get a prompt from us, simulate that real world, generate synthetic data that then we can feed into an autonomous vehicle. So this is like, for example, one example of how we are thinking about utilizing kind of this space. Laura, over to you.
All right. Yeah, the reason I'm excited about Gen AI is that it makes all of these AI applications quite possibly to develop by people who have pretty much no expertise, right? So, what before required knowing algorithms and understanding what's a classification algorithm and what's an extraction algorithm and how to do data translation. Now, all you need is, write a prompt, right? And maybe provide a few examples. So it's becoming much, much easier to use by people with no computer science background. And that's very exciting, right? It comes at a cost, right? All of these models are large. They, take a long time to do inference, but it is very exciting, right? And so I think a lot of the work that will happen in the next few years is, beyond enabling people to build all of these cool applications. How do you make the applications run at scale and have good return on investment by reducing compute costs?
And what do you see, Jack, from your perspective, Meta? Because obviously Meta is a producer of at least one foundational model, but you're also, as an organization, consumer of these models and embedding your products. What do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of interesting because the AI or the Facebook AI research component of Meta is quite disparate from other parts of the organization. So there actually is even a learning gap within Facebook, right? For example, you have global sales often trying to sell, ads products or AI products to advertisers, and often they don't know what they're selling, right? So I think it is interesting that there, even within the producers org, there is a divide in terms of understanding. But overall, in the marketing sphere where I operate, it's pretty pervasive. I think the ease of use and the UX that OpenAI was able to kind of get to market is unprecedented, right? It's just so easy to incorporate ChatGPT into most marketing workflows that I think there's a BCG study that kind of surveyed a number of Fortune 500 companies, and I think something like 90 to 91% of these companies already are using ChatGPT. And this survey was a month ago, so I assume the number has actually gone up even more since then. But I think kind of the combination of the adaptability of the algorithms, the LLMs, coupled with the new UX, I think has made AI accessible to more people than ever before. No longer do you have to have specialized computer science knowledge. You don't have to interact with APIs. It's just there for you in a really nice and simple interface. And happy to talk more about how this has impacts for marketing. But yeah, I think it's sort of pretty pervasive as far as I can tell to multiple verticals.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And then we'll come back to some of the things that we shared here. Just on the topic of foundational model, these are powerful large models that are sort of general purpose that can do a lot of different things now. Like Baxter, for what you're doing, and you're looking at this model, like do go to the internal stakeholders and say, here are the models, like you just pick and choose, or there's a strategy of choosing which foundational models to build a product internally?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And coming from like a product manager perspective, like I think, and not just focus on Capital One, but just generally, I think it's really helpful to think about like understanding the different options and understanding the trade-offs for different approaches. And to Laura's point, like as a product manager, you really have to think about scale and like costs, and how do you take a pilot that may be successful like internally in testing, and then really scale that like to millions of customers. There's just so much to think about, and not a lot of successful examples, especially in highly regulated industries like financial services, for example. So I think just taking that product perspective and like taking a step back, evaluating your options, and thinking about like what are the business trade-offs for each different approach, like that's something that the product teams are really trying to get better at and experiment with, and we'll see where it goes.
If you had to give advice, and this is open to all the panelists, for other companies looking to build applications or new products or embed generative AI in their existing products, how would you advise them on using open source model versus closed source model, which you have the sort of the Llama 2 and others on one hand, and then you have sort of the closed models, which are the poster child is the model from GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 and others?
I can take that. I would make it less about open source versus closed source, as opposed to making sure that your infrastructure and your approach is actually resilient to having to change the model underneath at some point. So there are open source models that are available now. They may not be available, let's say, 2 years from now, right? The second aspect is that regulation is advancing and changes rapidly. So a model that is in open source that is trained on some data now may not be quite good to use if you care about the provenance of the data, right? So you may have to adopt another model sometime in the future. So my advice is, rather than making it open source versus closed source, make sure that you adopt a platform where you can choose the models, and you have a path going forward where if one model becomes obsolete or not usable because of maybe concerns with the data, you can quickly migrate to a new model, right? And we all know how hard it is to actually train one thing and then have it, be modified later on. But that's my my advice.
And I completely agree with Laura on this. My advice would be not to index too much around open source versus closed source. I think that part of it ultimately becomes a very minute implementation detail. MLOps that you still need to worry about. So how you're operating this model, how you're building applications around it, how do you make sure that the model underneath is upgraded? It's the place that I would spend majority of the investment and thoughts on.
Yeah, maybe let's actually move that forward and talk about that, which is, we have these models, and we may not think about them open source, closed source. I really like this idea that how do we make the model resilient, so that if we have to change a model, we're able to do that while keeping the things that we care the most about from the models intact. And then Dariush, you talked about the ML ops, and for those in the audience that are not familiar with ML ops, is maybe describe a little bit more about what that is and how does that tie into implementing machine learning models, and now extending to implementing larger large language models or generative models?
Yeah, sure thing. I think MLOps, the best way to think about it is everything about an end-to-end machine learning kind of a pipeline without the machine learning part of it. It's all about making sure that you have the right set of data, that your data is clean, that you are actually measuring the effectiveness of your model, and you're measuring the drift of your model. I think all of that is kind of falls into the MLOps bucket. I believe there was a Google research a while ago that said about 90% of the stuff that happens on machine learning has nothing to do with machine learning. It's all about the MLOps part of it. And I think that 90% was actually like fairly a lowball kind of a number. But now that we get to the generative AI type of world, now we have things like prompt engineering. We have things like fine-tuning, supervised fine-tuning. All of that falls into the kind of category of generative AI ops or ML ops for Gen AI. So super critical.
And maybe Jack and Baxter, for you kind of talk about that as well from a product perspective and from your domain perspective. How do you monitor that, you know, these models are working as they should be? Because Darush talked about drifts, which can include data drifts, which are changing the distribution of the data perhaps, or model drifts and other kinds of drifts. How do you know that whether it's a large language model or other models that they are working as they should be in your product?
I can take a first stab at this. And I was just reflecting on this before the call, like how quickly things are shifting for the skills you need as a product manager. So like I've worked with sort of traditional B2B SaaS companies, and the metrics to evaluate the performance of like a SaaS product are pretty straightforward. You know, whether users are adopting it, like are they converting in certain funnels? Like, you know, is the product like still up, or is there downtime? Like these are very basic metrics, but when it comes to AI-based applications, there are just so many more complex methodologies to try to assess like the performance of the models. Like was previously mentioned, just even keeping up with the accuracy and bias and the like hallucination rates, you know, understanding like whether data is being leaked, sensitive data is being leaked, like that's another really important sort of ML ops component. There's just like a change in your framework as a PM that you really need to take to like really establish benchmarks that you can measure against that are going to be a lot more complex than kind of like traditional metrics for applications. So I think there's a long way to go to get like, you know, effective at making those benchmarks and evaluations, but it really starts with like, you know, thinking about it from a different perspective than we're used to.
Yeah, I would add that I'm not an expert on AI explainability or like sort of observability. That's essentially like almost a field in and of itself at this point. With LLMs, it's kind of tricky because the training step is kind of separated or bifurcated from the inference step, right? So training is done on clusters with many machines and nodes and can cost hundreds of millions of dollars in some instances, right? And I think that, you know, there's very little that, you know, most enterprises have in towards seeing how the training happens and, you know, tweaking the parameters or changing the optimization routine. Like we don't get to see that. We only see the final sort of, you know, trained parameter set, right? So I think what it comes down to is observing how the model operates in the field. So observing, you know, are there drifts in the you know, the customer data sets that comes in? Are there drifts in the instances versus what the model maybe saw in the past, right? You know, are there changes maybe in the data set perhaps that you know, if you're an enterprise and data quality is a concern, maybe you want to look at the data quality first before, you know, jumping to see if something's wrong with the model, right? So in my experience, it tends to be like these first order things with like, you know, just ML ops, as Darush mentioned, or data quality that could impact the performance of the LLM, less so with the inner workings of the LLM itself. But yeah, I will admit that I'm not an expert in this field.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead.
So I was going to say that it's essentially impossible to guarantee that when you move from one model to another, your prompt is going to work exactly the same. So you are going to have to change it. So going back to your metrics and your test sets, you will have to make sure you have those so that you can measure if your prompt has reached the quality that you need. The other thing that I was going to say is that there is, or at least this is how I'm coaching customers, right? If you want to reduce the number of hallucinations and also make sure that your model is more suitable for your data, one way to do that is proving your POC that, okay, it's doable with prompt engineering and a few examples, but then you actually graduate into hardening it and see if techniques like prompt tuning or even fine tuning a model with more data that you are gathering from your POC stage actually will lead to, number one, a model that is more stable because it has been trained with a lot of your data. And number two, a model that is much smaller and therefore has a much smaller compute footprint, therefore bringing you higher return on investment. So you kind of get two things at the same time. But of course, it requires work, right? Because it's one thing to be to give 5 examples and see that things magically work, but it's another thing to actually gather 1,000 or more examples that would be needed for training a smaller model, tuning a smaller model. But yeah, you know, there are trade-offs, right? So you pay for it now, or you pay for it when you have to change the model later on.
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways is that whether it's generative AI or the more classic machine learning, some of the fundamental things, and Jack, you talk about this, like kind of first order things still matter tremendously. The data quality, the corporate people use, the way that we think about which model is suitable for the use case and the business needs, and then how do we actually deploy that and implement that at scale with trust, redundancy, resilience, and visibility, and defining those metrics. And those metrics may be changing or depending on kind of the internal frameworks. So maybe let's talk a little bit more on one more thing on the foundational model side, the more the technical side, and then we move to how can we use generative AI and build the right products and serve the business needs, and then tie that to the user experience side of things as well, which Laura, you mentioned is the prompt tuning, the fine tuning. OpenAI recently, I think, released fine tuning API. Fine tuning used to be a big part of the data scientist's work, which is fine tuning those models. Where do you see that going with the prompt tuning, and the fine tuning? Are those tasks going to be further abstracted away? How should we think about this element of working with generative AI and large language models?
Yeah, so essentially the prompt tuning and the prompt engineering are maybe two, they're in the same family of guiding the model to do what you want for your use case, right? So prompt engineering is very simple. You give maybe some instruction in English and a few examples. Prompt tuning, you need more examples, but you do not change the parameters of the model. And then fine tuning, you change the parameters of the model and you need more data. So each one of them are valuable in different use cases. And in the end, in my opinion, you need a platform where you can do all three. So I've seen, you know, I work with enterprise customers, and I've seen, you know, there are some of the enterprise customers who are like, we are going to build our own infrastructure and platform, and then there are the ones that are going to buy it, right? So there's the build versus buy. Whether you build it or you buy it, make sure that you have all the three techniques available to you, along with the rest of the infrastructure on how do you manage your data, what kind of data transformations you have, what kind of data sources, and then how do you evaluate your models and all of the MLOps stuff around it, plus the governance side. Once your models are deployed, can you monitor for bias, and drift, and so on and so forth. But you need a platform, right? So I would call it an MLOps platform if you wish, in which you have access to all of these techniques.
That's interesting. I think we heard the word like large language model ops And that probably will include kind of prompt tuning, which in ML ops, we don't have that step because we don't necessarily have to do prompt tuning at scale. Before we turn to translating generative AI to good products and good user experience, any other wisdom words that you want to share?
I will just add that do not underestimate the size of the investment that you need for the platform that Laura was mentioning. These are requires quite a bit of analysis and investment in there. It's not a small feat.
Yeah, having built a platform in IBM, I know what it takes.
Right.
All right. So now let's talk about embedded, what I call kind of embedding generative AI in different products. And all of you work with enterprise customers and looking to continue to push the edge of generative AI into these products. One of the things that's that we see is that chatbots is getting like a renaissance, right? Like chatbot was being built using prior technology, and now seems like one of the big use cases is building different kind of bots, like chatbot with a chat interface that can extract information, and in the back end there is generative models enabling that. What other user interfaces or other sort of modalities that you see beyond chatbot enabled by generative AI models?
I think from the perspective of a developer, the very useful ones are integrations in your IDE of a code assistant, right? That either generates comments from you or explains code or generates code from your comments. I think personally, I find that really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think the code compilation and code generation is definitely another very large and I would dare say successful kind of subsystem, sub area from generative AI. Actually, taking that one a step further, one of the things that I've seen a few startups actually coming up with is that it's about automating parts of the conversation with the data scientist. The problem that they're trying to solve is that, let's say a marketing individual or someone in sales or someone on the business side has a question about data and they actually want to make a decision based on the data. So they go to a data scientist and then say, hey, can you figure out X? And somehow this data scientist goes in the corner and spends about 3-4 days and then comes back with a response for X. And he said, that is what I found about X. And somehow that's not fast enough for the business. So they have already made the decision without the data. And what they would like to do, these businesses, is to, instead of talking to a live data scientist, they actually want to talk to let's just call it a data scientist bot that can then go figure out that response, maybe not perfectly, but figure that one out and then bring it back. And what we have seen is that the data scientists actually really like such an application as well, because they can focus on core data science problems for their enterprise as well. So that was something that I did not expect to see, but I've seen quite a few evidence of that in the market already.
Very interesting. Baxter and Jack, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting you brought up the chatbots, because I was just reflecting on the fact that chatbots have been very unpopular for many years. They've been tried by so many companies the past few years. And ultimately, there have been so many failures, but it wasn't the fact that chatbots themselves were bad, but just like the underlying capabilities were not there. So in the past year, we've reached a tipping point where GPT 3.5 and 4.0 and all the Anthropic, all these models have built successful chatbots because suddenly they're useful. So I don't know if it's necessarily the chatbot itself, but really how good are the underlying models getting? And then, I think I would bet on building more applications where generative AI is more seamlessly embedded into them, into existing kind of SaaS platforms where you don't necessarily have to do all of the work of coordinating with a chatbot, going back and forth, like Dariush was saying. I think some of that we're gonna turn into other software experiences. But yeah, it's really interesting. Just like it is so hard to predict what's going to happen. Just like, look at these tipping points and, how they can impact like what applications ultimately are successful in the marketplace.
Yeah, I fully echo what everyone said. And this is my personal opinion, but I think that on top of like new modalities that might come out that allow people to interact with LLMs, I also think the ability to create objective functions and tightly couple LLMs with existing workflows will be super valuable. I don't think any company has really solved this problem yet, because inherently right now, I view it as a progression, right? Because the way that people use ChatGPT and LLMs now are largely as decision support tools. They're not kind of baked in as part of some automated process or, some self-learning system that, effectively can self-write itself. If you think about like maybe even marketing, right? Imagine, the way a marketer uses it now, they have ChatGPT in some window on their desktop. They think, hey, what's the right copy I should do for this campaign? They type it in, they get a bunch of candidate responses back, and then they themselves, with their human neurons, pick out which copy kind of fits, marketing guidelines, right? So imagine if there was a tightly coupled system where instead of the human quality controlling the outcome, maybe it's governed by the performance of the campaign, or it's governed by the number of clicks that a performance marketing, a Google campaign would get, right? So in that scenario, no human is actually in the loop. And there have been approximations to kind of this tightly coupled system, but they're still pretty nascent. So I think we would definitely expect, that modality to kind of increase over time. I think that's where a lot of the efficiency gains will be seen.
So Jack, you're talking sort of, oh, go ahead, Baxter.
Oh, I was just going to add in, like, not to change the subject, but just on top of that, one thing I was also really excited about was like having agents that are able to coordinate with each other and specialize in certain functions. So I think it kind of goes along with what Jack's saying. It's so hard to predict where that could take us potentially, but it's a really exciting development.
I think you're describing sort of the world where, today we still have human providing prompts to get certain tasks done, but in the future world, we'll have more and more of that automated based on some sort of feedback loop without human in the loop, exactly, if you will. Yeah. And then you have kind of a bigger kind of orchestration happening. What do you think about that, Laura?
So I think business automation is a big thing, right? And it's not a big thing only now, right? It's been a big thing for probably tens of years, right? How do you build workflows that are automating knowledge workers' tasks, right? Where instead of me reading an email and downloading an attachment and then extracting something from the attachment and then putting it in this other thing and then submitting it somewhere else, you have a workflow that stitches all of these things together, where maybe some of these steps here are now becoming possible because the AI technology has become more powerful, right? So someone has to provide, number one, the business automation process platform where these things can be strung together. And then all of these nodes where AI has to happen would be things where from tuning or prompt engineering, someone figures out what is the right prompt that will enable that particular piece of the workflow, where, before it takes me 30 minutes to click, and do copy paste, it may now only take me 5 minutes. Great, right? So yes, definitely agree with you guys that the business automation, it's definitely becoming more and more possible due to this more advanced, sophisticated AI tech.
Jack,
yeah, sorry, just I like the term business automation, but I think the way that I think about it is that pretty much for every job that humans do, there will be a co-pilot, there will be an assistant that will help make the human more efficient so that we can focus on the things that a human has to do, and the machine can then help us out with some creativity and some automation of the laborious tasks and things like that.
And there's actually, my question was getting to you, is that you work in autonomous vehicle space and or autonomous driving. Do you see generative AI accelerating the pace of development of autonomous driving. You also now talked about co-pilots. How does that work with some of the bleeding edge product development?
Autonomous vehicle space is a fairly, I would say, complex space, at times a little bit unnecessarily complex space. But the places that we are actually utilizing quite a bit of generative AI is actually generating scenarios that, humans sitting in the room and thinking about everything that could go wrong cannot think about it, right? Cannot figure out all of those scenarios. So we can use some help from a generative type of an artificial intelligence entity to help us imagine other things that could happen, so that then we can train our models to react to them in a good, responsible kind of a manner.
Great.
And Joyce, could I just add, while we're on the topic of synthetic data, I think you see this in so many industries, the potential. So in financial services, like synthetic data is pretty exciting. And especially from someone who like comes from a privacy background or privacy angle, it's exciting to be able to use generative AI to create data sets that are essentially not real. So they can't be tied to any customer with any like sensitive data, but at the same time feel like very genuine and are like can be used to train models, to do analyses, and to be used in so many different use cases to accelerate development, without while still protecting people's privacy and reducing the chance that it's leaked out. So I think it's a really exciting development. Like there are so many places you could see like generating synthetic data as being useful, across industries.
And Baxter, you want to elaborate on some other use cases of perhaps generative AI in financial services, things that you see?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big one. So much of financial services is just like predicting how customers will behave in certain scenarios. So if there's some edge cases, that we don't have that many examples of, you can create more and then train the models to be more effective at predicting those scenarios. So that's definitely a big one. There's customer service, like so much business automation, as Laura was talking about, is possible just to like improve the customer experience. And just there are so many pilots happening. I think in regulated sectors, definitely the adoption will be a bit slower. And that's just kind of natural, I think, for the industry, but there's definitely going to be some stuff coming out soon, hopefully, in those spaces.
So let's
And sorry, I just had also a comment for Baxter, which is that Capital One probably is an example of a company that might want to train an in-house LLM, right? Probably the heavily regulated ones with privacy concerns might be like candidates for that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not in charge of that and I can't speak for what the company's doing, but I think to the earlier conversation about what, where in the machine learning AI, life cycle can product managers be, or, where in the life cycle, do you want to start with creating these models? Like, do you care about do you want to train your own foundational models? Do you just care about fine tuning or prompt tuning? For the more heavily regulated industries, you're going to have to go as far back as you can in the stack to, probably generating your own base models to be safer. So, that's something that's definitely hotly discussed, probably a lot of companies.
Yeah, another aspect for highly regulated industries is, where your AI is running. Is it running in software as a service in a public cloud, or is it running on premises, right? So again, going back to the idea of choosing a platform, choose a platform that if you need to run it on your premises, you can install the thing on your premises. You don't want to be in a situation where your employees are, sending proprietary data out there.
Yeah, that's the biggest concern, like data leakage. How do you, it's so hard to predict how these models even operate, right? Like the interpretability and observability, like Jack said, is a whole industry in itself. So you just have to be very, very careful. There's only so much instructing you can do. But, sometimes they're just hard to predict, like, how people can get around the protections you put in place.
So let's talk about on the product side, the best practices that you will give to the audience about taking these models, really powerful models, and discover new use case or accelerate existing use case. What are the steps that you take, or what are the best practices that you will offer?
I can start. What I tell people is that, take a use case that you think will offer you a high ROI and try the largest model that you have available for you and do your prompt engineering and see if it actually works. If the largest model is not going to work, then probably you just need to move on to the next use case, right? But if that works, then try to increase your ROI by making sure that you run a smaller model. Okay, I haven't heard about an enterprise that doesn't care how much things cost, right? But if you care how much things cost, the lower the cost, the higher your ROI, right? So once you're past POC stage, see if you can get some training data to try to prompt tune a smaller model. And then once that is successful and gets you where you want to be, try and get more data from where you have deployed your application and see if you can fine tune an even smaller model. So that, while you may start with something that has 1 trillion parameters and you end up with something that maybe has 1 billion parameters, your costs are going to be hugely different, right? But that's my advice. That's how I advise all customers to go about. Try to prove the use case with a very large model and then try and see if progressively training smaller and smaller models will get you where you need to be.
I would add in as well that having engineering rigor on top of your LLM is very valuable. So things like good code scaffolding, proper deployment practice, MLOps, as Dariush mentioned. Also, like automated test cases, where if for example, the types of prompts that tend to come in, those can be actually perennial test cases that are part of your deployment, right? So I think having good engineering rigor, it does go a long way. And I think these days, there's so much sort of focus on developer productivity and APIs and all that, as what Laura mentioned, there's a lot of stuff out of the box that might just work, right? So, I recommend definitely trying the whole suite of, large, small models, try as much things out of the box as possible before, trying to, fine tune too much or, God forbid, build your own, train your own LLM. More than likely there'll be something that fits your use case, at least from a base scenario.
Dariush, Baxter, anything to add?
Baxter, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would echo what Laura said, especially around, like, I think, again, putting yourself in the shoes of a customer, working backwards from like what customers want and using that to drive your development process is critical, because I see so many times people getting distracted by projects, just like, let's just do something because it sounds really cool, or we have this capability, so like, let's go and try it. But you really have to start with what the customer wants, work backwards, validate that like that use case can be successful, and then really make sure you have like really, really good high quality data that you can access. So making sure that's available, and then you can start getting into like, worrying about the specifics of the trade-offs of the different models and the training process and like the scaling and all that stuff. But like, you really just need to focus on, is this valuable to customers? Can we validate it throughout the process before you go and do like way too much work on something that might not like really have value?
And I do agree with pretty much everything that was shared. I just add that I don't think the fundamental principles of building a brand new product actually changes with the emergence of generative AI. At the end of the day, if you are trying to build a new product, you want to make sure that you are solving a real customer problem in a way that it is fundamentally better than what they actually had before. Generative AI is awesome. It's great. It's just a new tool. that we have in our toolbox to use to solve real customer problem in a fundamentally better way. That part of the product development cycle really doesn't change.
Great. So let's talk about one more thing, then we sort of look to the future and then open up to the audience to see if the audience has any questions. And for those who are attending, feel free to put your questions in the chat or Q&A, and we'll get to them shortly. So there's a big topic in generative AI or large language model, which is hallucination. And that tied to trustworthiness of the output from these models and the safety of this model, depending on the use case. How do you advise your internal clients or external clients about this? Obviously, there are some ways that's addressing hallucination, but kind of broadly speaking, how do you manage this with your stakeholders?
I think it goes back to the use case. What are the use cases? If your use case is about finding clauses in a contract that are about termination for convenience, then, you know, you can get some training data and, you know, get a model that will kind of find those clauses for you without hallucination, right? But if you're in, you know, context of, you know, you want to do chat, right? You know, you can ask any question. The chances of hallucination may be large, right, depending on what prompt you wrote, right? In those kind of situations, again, the idea would be give enough context to the model such that the model is successful in not hallucinating to a large extent, right? So going back to the chatbot idea, very useful for these knowledge workers, customer care support. Ask questions whose answers are found in either product documentation. Then make sure that you give that product documentation as context to the large language model through something like a retrieval augmented generation pattern, such that, you know, the context is there, so the model has a much smaller chance of hallucinating some or inventing an answer.
I think there's a perspective here as well around, like, you know, these tightly coupled systems, because if you can imagine just like an LLM that has you know, guardrails and, you know, whatever hallucination checks built in, like that doesn't exist right now, right? So these tend to come in as like a modular kind of layer on top of the LLM. So one could imagine the LLM produces some output, and before that output gets shown to a user, it goes through a second model that maybe has been trained through a panel or, you know, a human committee, right, so to speak, that just collects training data and just marks, is this a hallucination or is this not a hallucination, right? So, you know, there are these like kind of modular systems that companies have built out to kind of mitigate these issues. But yeah, until something tightly coupled comes out where like these guardrails are built into the LLM, I think it's always going to be sort of, you know, either you just deal with it, like kind of have a use case that can cope with hallucinations every now and then, or, you know, maybe, you know, find some way to build, you know, some modular attachment that you can improve over time. So as hallucinations happen, they become training data for your second model to serve as a guardrail. Yeah, but there's no real good way, as far as I know, to deal with it at the moment.
And I would say I completely agree. I think some of the things that we will see actually coming up in the very near future are more built-in guardrails, at least in LLMs, for hallucination or protection against hallucination. Another area that I suspect will become fairly kind of hot and involved kind of fairly soon is reinforcement learning based on a human in the loop type of steps. Again, we were talking about LLM ops. Part of LLM ops is to make sure that your LLM, with all the prompt engineering and prompt tuning that you have done, and with all the fine tunings that you actually want to do, still doesn't hallucinate that much. And at some point in time, you need to actually put the human in the loop, get feedback from them, and then feed that one back into the fine tuning. And that's the human in the loop reinforcement learning aspect.
Maybe let's move on to some of the forward-looking topics. Not that we have a crystal ball, but all of you have worked in industry for a very long time, and you've seen many different changes in the tech industry and also in data and machine learning and AI. One of the things people talk about, and you, Deluge, maybe we start with you because you brought up co-pilots, that everybody will have a co-pilot in everything, perhaps, is what's going to happen to the knowledge work? Will the enterprises organization need fewer people, especially skilled people? Or is it different type of skills emerging? I think OpenAI and partner with another university have done some research that does show that there will be kind of drop in skilled or knowledge workers or need of that long term because of the products built with generative AI. What do you all think in terms of future of knowledge work?
I actually don't think knowledge workers, or any workers for that matter, will lose their job to AI. I think they might actually lose their job to another knowledge worker who uses AI, but I don't think they will lose their job to the AI itself. But I definitely foresee the skills, the day-to-day life of a knowledge worker change as we have better and better generative AI kind of models coming out. You know, it was not too long ago that we asked some knowledge workers as to how fast you can type in a typewriter, how many words per second can you actually type. I haven't seen a typewriter in a while. I've seen lots of keyboards and things like that. But yeah, the situation changed, and I think the situation will change a little bit more in the future. How's that going to look like? I do not know, but I think everybody will have an assistant that will help them with quite a bit of the creativity.
Yeah, and I would add, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and like the policy implications or societal implications of this technology advancing. And I think something that gives me comfort is that there's just, there's no shortage of work to go around for any company. And AI is really like an accelerant. If it can make developers, work 2x, 5x, 10x faster, there's no shortage of work for like things that can be built. With the people we currently have, as a product manager, that we can work on about like 3 or 4 things at a time out of 100 that might be good ideas. So if we could work on, if we could go 5 or 10x faster, we could get through maybe those 100 good ideas. And so I'm just not, I don't feel like there's a shortage of work to do to be done. So I'm hoping that it can be an accelerant, and rather than something we should be too worried about.
So I come in with a slightly pessimistic point of view, which is that, like, simple question is, if you are improving efficiency by like 2x, 5x, 10x, naturally that will lead enterprises to try to find cost savings and really ask themselves, do I need this team of 20 copywriters or this team of 20 marketing analysts when now with AI, I can produce the same output and, just have 5 people that use AI, right? So I think to Darush's point, naturally there might be some thinning of traditional roles with efficiencies come in. I have actually seen this in action as well, even without like the advent of ChatGPT. But with the way that marketing has evolved, it kind of went from the Don Draper non-digital world where you're waving your hands in front of keyboard, in front of whiteboards, and talking about the next best ad copy or the next best campaign, right? And now, fast forward 10, 15 years, not even that long of a time, most CMOs now have a data background, right? They at least know how to look at digital marketing from a data perspective. They know how to think about the different variants that you need to test via standardized, rigorous A/B testing. So I think even that has, I think, kind of put into obsolescence some of the the previously core skill set in marketing, right? And I think that this trend will continue with Gen AI. It may not completely obviate the need for humans, but I think just based on the efficiency gains that are likely, there naturally will be some thinning of headcount. But yeah, I mean, by no means do I think that at some point in the world, everything will be automated and the singularity will happen. But I do think that it will separate, some folks from, from being productive versus not being productive. So yeah, that's just my slightly pessimistic take.
Laura, any?
Oh, I don't have a pessimistic view. I have an optimistic view because fundamentally I'm very lazy. So if I have something that can automate the boring stuff, I will take it because I can focus on the stuff that is more creative and just minimize the time I spend on boring stuff. So I do agree that some certain professions will be affected to some extent, right? I'm thinking, for example, about the legal review, right? If you have a model that can help you sift through a 500 pages contract faster than how you do it today manually, then obviously you don't need that many people hours, right, for that. But then the question is, okay, are those hours going to be better spent somewhere else within the legal profession? Yeah.
Well, you could take on more clients and make more money. So, I guess there's two sides to the coin there.
Yeah.
Completely agree. As in, you're more efficient, then the size of the cake increases. Go into the other areas that you couldn't afford to go before. Let the machine take care of the mundane stuff. So, I share the optimistic view that Laura shared.
So stay on this a little bit longer. One of the use cases that came out earlier was the GitHub Copilot, and then there are other coding Copilot. How do you see the skills required change or not change for software engineers and data scientists and any of the technical kind of developer engineering roles going forward?
Oh, I am very optimistic about that. General software engineering skills around how to think about a large system, how to architect a large system. No AI is going to tell you how to architect and how many pods you're going to have and which database to use here and how to stitch it with this other thing, right? So architecture skills, system development skills, those will be needed. But what will become less and less needed is knowing like the little nitty gritty, okay, how do I write this little function, right? Because you can just say, well, write me a function that does X, and then an LLM will provide the function. So then you just stick it in the right place in your code. Your pull request will be more documented because you can have something that summarizes your code, so you don't have to start and type and write over there, right? You just review what has been written, and so therefore you become more productive. But yeah, I don't see LLMs taking over general software development of large systems. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'm too optimistic.
No, I agree with you. I also, to add to that, I also hope that it will help our software engineers write better tests. So that, yeah.
Yeah, I actually fully agree here because I think this is one case where what Dariush said is absolutely true. Like the efficiency gain from introducing LLM actually will spur a new industry in like managing the LLM itself, right? And I think there's no better people to kind of fall into that role than the existing data scientists and engineers that built the system in the first place. So I think that's actually almost like a one-to-one sort of replenishment of the role. And yeah, and I think there's probably some very optimistic progression of like how Copilot's going to evolve and slowly take on more and more code generation capability. But right now, as it stands, Copilot is great for like writing small kernels or small functions that you as an engineer just don't want to deal with. Like recently, I wanted to write a Python function that like told me the the hours that a market was open for all the security exchanges like worldwide, and actually it did that for me within like a few seconds, right? So, versus me going to Stack Overflow and trying to find out like, oh, what is this time zone difference and so on. Like it just did it for me very, very quickly. So I think it definitely will bring back mind share to data scientists and engineers. And I do think that the industry is large enough where it will be definitely accretive for them.
Maybe let's bring that to the data scientists. And maybe we'll start with you, Laura. NLP, so natural language processing, which is a big part of within generative AI. What's going to happen to NLP?
Oh, what? Just because it's called generative AI, you don't think it's NLP? It's absolutely NLP. So yeah, it's just another tool in the box. I've lived through 3 of them. This is just the 4th one, and maybe 5 years from now there will be the next Gen AI 2.0. that will be like an even fundamental departure. We can do things even better. But yeah, natural language processing is there, right? Whether you do it with a large language model or you do it with a regular expression, still there. So definitely a lot of use cases that we're seeing are about automating document processing, understanding what's in a contract, understanding what's in an invoice so that it can be routed to the right department. So those are all tasks. We just have a different tool to solve the tasks.
And recently I've heard someone saying that perhaps not far from now, there will be new architecture beyond the transformer models, which is
totally possible.
Generative AI. As an NLP expert, what are some of the innovative things that's happening in NLP, or things that you think people are not talking about because everybody's talking about generative AI, but are still areas of very interesting research in natural language processing?
So I think a lot of interesting research is going to happen on, model selection, alignment, tuning. Transformers are just a different kind of model, but it's still a model, right? So, how many instances to use in prompt tuning, what kind of parameters, all of those are still things that need to be determined. And so I'm seeing a lot of effort being put into this kind of selection techniques. And then the other one is around how do you govern the models once they are deployed in production. Totally possible that there will be another architecture. The same way there were transformers, and before them there were deep neural networks, and before then there were, support vector machines, and before that there were regular expressions. Totally possible that there will be a new architecture.
Yeah, I'll interject here. A crazy thing is I know the first author of the Transformers paper, or the attention paper, and while I think they had an inkling of how impactful it was going to be, they actually really had no idea, right? So it was just it's crazy that such a transformative technology was it was not kind of identified as transformative until just randomly the snowball picked up and everyone was talking about it. So yeah, it was really could be just one of those things that just pops up out of out of the blue, and yeah, the whole thing changes, right? So yeah, it seems extremely 0 to 1 in the way that it came out.
So before we have 2 questions. Before we take those questions, maybe just go around the room. What's top of mind for you in generative AI, or even in machine learning AI? It doesn't have to be generative AI in the year to come. What's interesting to you? What makes you excited? Maybe Baxter, we start with you, and then Darush. And
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of promise. Like this year, you can follow the hype cycles around new technologies and kind of try to plot out where we are on the cycle. So I think, I don't know if we've reached peak hype yet, and maybe there's going to be a little bit of a regression next year, but ultimately whatever happens, I think, just seeing the pace of innovation and trying to keep up with it, I think that's the most overwhelming part. And just I think it's also super exciting. So I don't know, I'm looking forward to just trying to stay to keep up with the amazing work that's happening and try to get some of it implemented, and then try not to get distracted by the new next shiny thing, and really see it through, so we can have some really successful applications working in the wild before everyone moves on to whatever the next architecture is or next big thing. So I don't know, I'm excited to see all the innovation, but I do want to see the promise of the transformers, the LLM based applications, try to see that through and see where it goes as well.
What I would like to see, and I'm excited that there is some work actually happening there, is really the next hardware architecture that we end up building in the near future. With generative AI, now we are feeding a lot more data into the model that requires a lot more compute. We have billions and billions of parameters in there, and we are humans, and we say, okay, it's X billions. That's small. I want it to be 10x billions. And that will require totally new, different ways of thinking about our hardware, our compute architecture, our networking architecture. So I would love to see what comes out of research in that area, and how then the engineers will take that 0 to 1 research and then build amazing things around it. Go forward.
Jack?
Oh, I can go. Yeah, I think for me, I actually am excited almost more so about the ecosystem of things that's about to happen versus like the advent of like a new technology or like the new transformer coming out. I think the fact that, you know, LLMs are so adaptable and kind of cover so much ground without specific domain knowledge or expertise will lead to kind of an explosion of, you know, kind of re-envisioning what a lot of classical products are today, right? So, you know, there's a company right now that is trying to reinvent search, you know, reinvent the way that, you know, people use Google, where, you know, in the past, people would not have even tried that or attempted that because God knows how many engineering and man hours went into, you know, fine tuning Google, right? But now with LLMs, it's actually a possibility, and it's opened up like that space again for competition, right? So I think, you know, it's just kind of lowered the moat for a lot of you know, startups and you know, kind of entrepreneurial folks out there. And, you know, even today with the way the technology is, I think it's already groundbreaking. I can only imagine what it's going to be like in 5 to 10 years, and sort of the ecosystem that it'll provide.
Yeah, I'm excited about scaling. So where last year I had to convince customers, I would talk for 15 minutes and tell them why foundational models are important and they should consider it. You know, this year has been all about everybody wants foundational models, right? And they want to deploy it at scale and they want to build applications. So in my mind, building platforms with you know, UX and capabilities that make application building faster and model governance better, specifically for these large language models, is what excites me. And I'm curious to see all of our use cases that our customers have and want to solve.
Great. Let's take the 2 questions we have here. The first question is around hallucination. And I will just paraphrase the question, which is, it seems that hallucination seems to be in the same realm as Black Swan. I suppose, you know, do you first agree with that notion that hallucinations there could be construed as Black Swan events? And the likelihood of these sort of Black Swan events become prevalent?
I can briefly take this one. I disagree because I think Black Swan implies, you know, actually, I agree in like a small way, because I think it implies like a huge risk of loss, right? And unless you're working in like a mission critical space, like maybe defense or financial services, where the risk of loss is like maybe like you leak customer data in some way, most of the time, I think hallucinations are going to happen, right? They're just a fact of life. You can't, you know, you have to build your system with that in mind, that it's going to produce some, you know, nonsensical output at some point, right? So it's not an if, it's a when. And I think number 2, you know, depending on your use case, right? If it's, you know, sort of manageable, the risk, then I think the what you put in place is different versus like a true financial Black Swan event. So yeah, so I think it's just kind of, in long story short, it's a reality that, you know, us as product managers and data scientists have to live with and sort of build, you know, the appropriate guardrails. And, you know, most of the time, I think for the vast majority of use cases, it's not truly like a Black Swan downside.
Hi. Let's take this. I think the second and third question, similar, you know, for Craig, we'll touch on more of the legal and copyright issues in an upcoming event hosted by UChicago Alumni Club here in New York in January. So stay tuned for that, and we'll cover more on the legal considerations, which we did not have time to cover today. But perhaps related is, what source do you follow or do you read to keep track of the developments in generative AI for the technical crowd or data scientists?
Actually, let me take a stab at that one. Do not underestimate YouTube. There are quite a few informative videos about generative AI on YouTube. In fact, I think IBM Research produces some of the best videos around generative AI. So you should definitely.
I've seen them. I second that. IBM's videos are great.
They're great.
Yeah,
I'll
I
also
would.
add that. Sorry, Baxter.
No, you go ahead, Jack.
Okay, LinkedIn is actually surprisingly good because people love gossiping about this stuff. So yeah, I mean, it may be of varying quality, but you will get up-to-date information on LinkedIn. Like people just love to, gossip and get tons of views on their posts. So yeah, surprisingly, that's kept me up to date.
I think it was quite a bit of human-driven hallucination in LinkedIn.
Yeah, I would say just like it seems like the traditional tech policy press, or not policy, just like tech press is maybe a little bit behind the curve, but like Twitter, Substack, YouTube, hanging out in like a Hayes Valley coffee shop, there's like more direct ways to get the like insights. So yeah, I wish there were some better answers, but also just like using Google News, setting keywords, like newsletters like TLDR AI, like things like that are maybe less traditional, I found really helpful.
Yeah, I'm working with research, so I have to try to pull myself back so that I do not experience, the fear of missing out on the latest development. But beyond some of the IBM resources, I do have two newsletters that I follow. One is Andrew Ng's The Batch newsletter. It's an excellent overview of what happened in the past week, both in the business world as well as some of the interesting research work. And in IBM, we have Armand Ruiz, who's running this no-code AI newsletter, where again, he's essentially taking an educational approach and explaining concepts and just, different aspects of what you should be considering when you're using large language models. So yeah, these are my two newsletters outside the various Slack channels.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, we're at time. I know we can continue to talk about this topic for a very long time, and we haven't had the opportunity to cover other topics. But I want to thank the panelists, Jack, Laura, Darush, and Baxter, for contributing to this lively conversation and bring your perspective into the room. And also to the audience for joining us tonight. And there are a lot of other amazing events held by University of Chicago Alumni Office and the various clubs. And thank you so much for checking them out. And we'll see you in January for the in-person event on AI and legal topics. So thanks, everybody, and have a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, all. Bye.